Good afternoon. Hola. For those of you unfamiliar with my work, every year I read through every issue of every English language nutrition journal in the world so you don't have to. Every year my talks are brand new because every year the science is brand new. I then compile all the most interesting, most groundbreaking, most practical findings into new videos. I upload to my website, nutritionfacts.org. Everything on the website is free. There are no ads, no corporate sponsorship, strictly non-commercial, not selling anything. Just put it up there as a public service, new videos and articles every day on the latest in nutritional science. In my annual presentation last year, I ran through the 15 leading causes of death here in San Francisco and about the role that diet may play in preventing, treating, and even reversing our top 15 killers, or if you remember, actually our top 16, since side effects from prescription drugs kill 106,000 Americans every year, which means that the sixth leading cause of death in the United States is doctors. Add in medical errors, which the Institute of Medicine estimates kills off another 44,000 people, and that brings me up to number 3. As the leading killer. Then throw in a few hospital-acquired infections. And we're talking maybe 187,000 Americans laid to waste, millions injured by medical care. Now, the best way to avoid the adverse effects of medical and surgical treatments and tests is not to avoid doctors, it's to avoid getting sick in the first place. And so what I thought I'd do this year is run through the top dozen reasons people visit their physicians in hopes of highlighting some of the research, latest research, to kind of move me lower down the list of common killers. Number 1 disease diagnosis, primary diagnosis and office visits, respiratory infections such as the common cold. Most Americans get between 2 to 3 colds a year. If you've been following my website, you'll know I featured a video this year showing that simple water gargling, tap water gargling, can significantly reduce one's risk of upper respiratory infections, appreciably benefit people, but that's the problem. It's a cost-free modality. That's why you've probably never heard of this research, because there's no corporate budget driving its promotion, right? There's a new drug, new surgical treatment. You'll see it on TV, but the reason you won't see ads on TV for broccoli is the same reason you won't see this kind of research. Same thing with exercise. Can improve immunity, decrease disease rates, respiratory infections. We're talking 25 to 50% reduction in sick days. Name one drug or supplement that can do that. Doesn't exist. And it doesn't take much. You let kids run around for just 6 minutes, and you can boost the number of immune cells circulating in their bloodstream by 30%. 6 minutes. And at the other end of the life cycle, exercise may help prevent age-related immune decline. Women in their 70s have about a 50% chance every fall season of falling ill with a respiratory infection. However, the women who walked just a half an hour a day cut their risk down to 20%, and the runners in the group got their risk under 10. So look at this. This is like a 5-time better immune system through something as simple as exercise. Who wouldn't want a boosted immune system? Well, I mean, there are millions of people that suffer from autoimmune diseases whose immune system's a little bit too boosted, and so might eating healthy make things worse by boosting immune function further? No. Those who eat healthy appear protected from autoimmune diseases. Given the extraordinary rarity of most autoimmune diseases among those eating traditional plant-based diets, before they westernized their diet, for example, not a single case of multiple sclerosis diagnosed among a population of 15 million people. But what about treating autoimmune diseases with a plant-based diet? Well, even a semi-vegetarian diet was found to successfully treat Crohn's disease better than any other intervention. The best result in relapse prevention, better than drugs, the best result. And look, Crohn's is an autoimmune disease, so what about treating MS with diet? Well, the most frequently prescribed drug for MS is called beta interferon, which costs $30,000 a year, makes you feel lousy, but look, might be worth it if it actually worked. Unfortunately, we found last year it does not prevent or delay long-term disability. That leaves chemo drugs like mitoxantrone, which causes irreversible heart damage in 1 out of 8 people who go on it, and treatment-related acute leukemia. It causes leukemia in nearly 1% of people who take it. But hey, look, MS is no walk in the park. If only there were a cheap, simple, safe, side effect-free solution that also just so happened to be the most effective treatment ever described. Dr. Roy Swank, who unfortunately we lost recently at age 99, a distinguished neurologist whose lifelong work culminated over 170 scientific papers. Let me just cut to the chase. He found that in all probability, MS is caused largely by the consumption of what? Animal fat, saturated animal fat. Now, he thought it was the sludging of the blood caused by even a single meal containing animal fats, which may kind of clog up tiny capillaries that feed our nerves. But now we know that animal fats can cause a range of deleterious effects, such as inflammation, if I've talked about. Who knows what the actual mechanism is? Regardless, the results Dr. Swank published remain the most effective treatment of multiple sclerosis ever reported in the world's medical literature. In patients with early-stage MS, 95% were without progression of their disease, not 6 months later, 34 years later, after adopting his low-saturated fat dietary program. To date, no medication-invasive procedure even comes close to that kind of success. Doesn't cost $30,000, doesn't give you leukemia, and works better. Now, neurological problems are indeed kind of second on the list, but tend to be more common things like headaches. Feel free to check out my video on treating migraine headaches with lavender oil rubbed on the upper lip. And hot sauce in the nose for cluster headaches? Believe me, it's better than having cluster headaches. I've talked about both preventing and treating Parkinson's with a plant-based diet, since it's one of our leading killers, but the most common movement disorder is not Parkinson's. It's what's called essential tremor, affecting 1 in 25 adults over 40 and 1 in 5 of those in their 90s, making it one of our most common neurological diseases. In addition to the potentially debilitating hand tremor that people get, they have other neuropsychiatric manifestations, difficulty walking, various levels of cognitive impairment. What causes it? Well, there's a group of neurotoxins that produce tremor called beta-carboline alkaloids. Hormone, one of the most potent of these tremor-producing neurotoxins. You expose people to these chemicals, they develop a tremor, you remove the chemicals, the tremor disappears. Or what if you're exposed long-term? Well, this recent study found that those with essential tremor have much higher levels of this toxin in their bloodstream compared to those without tremor. How did they get exposed to it? Primarily through meat. Beef, chicken, and pork, as well as fish, actually. So if this potent tremor-producing neurotoxin is concentrated in cooked muscle foods, well then, is meat consumption associated with higher risk of essential tremor? Men who ate the most meat in this study had 21 times the odds of essential tremor. Just to put that in context, you go back to the original studies on smoking and lung cancer, and we're talking at most 14 times the odds, not 21. That's like a 2,000% increase in odds for this disabling brain disease. Next on the list, circulatory diseases, number one killer, both men and women. So among populations eating plant-based diet, MS was practically non-existent. What about heart disease? Last year, the International Journal of Epidemiology reprinted this landmark article from the 50s, which started out with a shocking statement. In the African population of Uganda, coronary heart disease is almost non-existent. Our number one killer? Almost non-existent? What were they eating? All right. Well, plantains, sweet potatoes, other vegetables, corn, millet, pumpkins, tomatoes, green leafy vegetables taken by all, and their protein almost exclusively from plant sources. And they had the cholesterol levels to prove it. Very similar, actually, to what current day plant eaters have. Now, maybe the Africans were just dying early from something else. They didn't live long enough to get heart disease. No. Here's age-matched heart attack rates. Uganda versus St. Louis. Out of 632 autopsies in Uganda, 1 myocardial infarction. Out of 632 Missourians, 136 myocardial infarctions, more than 100 times the rate of our number one killer. Researchers were so blown away they did another 800 autopsies in Uganda. And again, still just that one small healed infarct, meaning it wasn't even the cause of death, among 1,427 patients. Less than 1 in 1,000, yet here it's an epidemic. This is a list of diseases commonly found here and in populations that eat and live like the U.S., but were rare, even non-existent, in populations that ate diets or continue to eat diets centered around whole plant foods. These are among our most common diseases, like obesity, hiatal hernia, the most common stomach problems, hemorrhoids, varicose veins, the most common venous problems, colorectal cancer, number 2 cancer killer, diverticulosis, the most common disease of the intestines, appendicitis, most common cause of emergency abdominal surgery, gallbladder disease, most common cause of non-emergency abdominal surgery, as well as ischemic heart disease, our commonest cause of death here, but a rarity among plant-based populations. Heart disease is a choice. It's like cavities. If you look at the teeth of people who lived 10,000 years before the invention of the toothbrush, they pretty much had no cavities. Didn't floss a day in their lives, no Listerine, no water pick, yet no cavities. Why? Because candy bars hadn't been invented yet. So, why do people continue to get cavities when we know that they can be prevented through diet? Well, it's simple, because the pleasure people derive from dessert may outweigh the cost and discomfort of the dentist. And look, that's fine, right? I mean, look, as long as people are kind of aware, understand the consequences of their actions, right? As a physician, what more can I do, right? If you're an adult and think the benefits outweigh the risk for you and your family, then go for it. I mean, I certainly enjoy the occasional indulgence. I've got a good dental plan, right? But what if instead of the plaque on our teeth, we're talking about the plaque building up in our arteries? Another disease that can be prevented through diet. Then what are the consequences for you and your family? Now we're not talking about scraping tartar anymore. Now we're talking life and death. The most likely reason most of our loved ones will die is heart disease. Look, it's still up to each one of us, to make our own choices as to what to eat and how to live, but we should make these choices consciously, right? Educating ourselves about the predictable consequences of our actions. Atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, begins in childhood. By age 10, the arteries of nearly all kids have fatty streaks, the first stage of the disease. Then the plaques start forming in our 20s, get worse in our 30s, and then can start killing us off. In our heart, there's a heart attack. In our brain, the same disease as a stroke. In our extremities, it can mean gangrene, and in our aorta, an aneurysm. Right? If there is anyone here today over the age of 10 years, then the choice isn't whether or not to eat healthy to prevent heart disease. It's whether or not you want to reverse the heart disease you already have. Ornish and Esselstyn proved you can reverse heart disease with a plant-based diet. But we don't have to wait for our first heart attack to start unclogging our arteries, right? We can start reversing our heart disease right now. We can start reversing the heart disease in our kids tonight. How do we do it? Well, according to the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Cardiology this year, the only risk factor required for heart disease is cholesterol. Having elevated levels of LDL, so-called bad cholesterol, in our bloodstream. You could be a smoker, diabetic, have all these other things, but if you don't have enough cholesterol in your bloodstream, there's just not enough substrate to build up these plaques. The plaques are made out of cholesterol. Right? So, we need to drop our LDL cholesterol to prevent our number one killer. To do that, we need to drop three things, our intake of three things, and that's trans fats, saturated fats, and dietary cholesterol. Trans fats increase our risk of heart disease, sudden death, diabetes, and they are only found one place, basically, in nature, and that is animal fats. The food industry, however, found a way to synthetically create these toxic fats by hardening vegetable oil in a process called hydrogenation, which rearranges their atoms and makes them act more like animal fats. Currently, nearly half of America's trans fat intake is from animal products, not hydrogenated oils. According to the USDA, cheese, milk, yogurt, burgers, chicken fat, turkey meat, bologna hot dogs contain about 1 to 5% trans fats just naturally. That's just the way they come. Now, there are a few percent trans fats in some of the refined vegetable oils as well, just because of the refining process. But look, is getting a few percent trans fats really a big deal? Well, the most prestigious scientific body in the United States, the National Academy of Sciences, concluded that the only safe intake of trans fats is 0. Because any incremental increase in trans fatty acid intake increases coronary artery disease, number one killer. Trans fat intake, whether from hydrogenated junk food or from animal products, either way may increase cardiovascular disease risk. Now, because trans fats are unavoidable, well, on non-vegan diets, getting down to 0 would be, quite a change for most Americans. One of the authors of the report, who's currently the director of Harvard's cardiovascular epidemiology program, famously explained why, despite this, they didn't explicitly endorse a plant-based diet. We can't tell people to stop eating all meat and all dairy products. He said, we could tell people to become vegetarians, he added, If we were truly basing this only on science, we would, but it is a bit extreme. Wouldn't want scientists basing anything on science now, would we? No. Avoiding saturated fat means basically avoiding dairy, chicken, cake, and pork. And avoiding cholesterol means avoiding all animal products and eggs in particular. The American Egg Board is a promotional marketing board appointed by the U.S. government whose mission is to increase demand for egg and egg products on behalf of U.S. egg producers. Now, because the board is overseen by the federal government, though, if egg corporations want to dip in to the $10 million it sets aside every year for advertising, well, they're not allowed to break the law with that money. What a concept. And this leads to quite revealing exchanges between egg corporations that want to use this money and the USDA on what can and cannot be said about eggs. Thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, I was able to get my hands on some of those emails. Would you like to see some? Yes. Of course, a lot of what I got looked like this. Please note a number of items about our Salmonella Crisis Support Module. Any questions? All right, but this is my favorite, even better, entire sheets of paper that just said this. That was the entire sheet of paper. Please consider the environment before printing this email, but that was the whole paper. That was our tax dollars hard at work. All right, but check this out. This is some egg company trying to put out a brochure on healthy snacking for kids. But because of existing laws against false and misleading advertising, the head of the USDA's Poultry Research and Promotions Programs reminds them that you can't couch eggs or egg products as being healthy or nutritious. See, the words nutritious and healthy carry certain connotations, that the food's actually good for you. But because eggs have the amount of cholesterol they do, not to mention the saturated fat, the words healthy and nutritious are problematic when it comes to eggs. Right? This is the USDA saying this. Since you can't say eggs are a healthy start to the day, the USDA suggests satisfying start. You can't call eggs a healthy ingredient. You can call it a recognizable ingredient. You can't truthfully say eggs are good for you. By law, the industry needs to steer clear of words like healthy or nutritious. See, for food to be labeled healthy under FDA rules, it has to be low in saturated fat. Eggs fail that test, and less than 90 milligrams of cholesterol per serving. I mean, even half an egg fails that test. Right? Not only is the industry barred from saying eggs are healthy, they can't even refer to eggs as safe. All references to safety must be removed as well. Remember, this is the USDA talking. Why? Because salmonella-infected eggs poison 142,000 Americans every year. There's an egg-borne epidemic every year in the United States. Instead of safe, you can call eggs fresh, the USDA suggests. But you can't call eggs safe. You cannot say eggs are safe to eat. Can't say they're safe. Can't even mention safety. Can't say they're healthful. All references to healthfulness must be removed as well. Wait a second. Not only can eggs not be called healthy, they can't even be called safe. Says who? Says the United States Department of Agriculture. I love the Freedom of Information Act. Musculoskeletal and connective tissue disorders are next. You always assume that cholesterol drugs, number one class of drugs prescribed. No, actually painkillers, number one drug prescribed for syndromes like fibromyalgia, which affects millions, but can be dramatically improved with a variety of plant-based diets. Got a number of videos about that. In fact, producing some of the most impressive results to date. I already covered diabetes and depression, if you were here last year, because they're two leading causes of death. So let me move on. Pap smears for early detection of cervical cancer, common reason for a doctor's visit. Cervical cancer is now considered a sexually transmitted disease caused by a sexually transmitted virus called HPV. Now, most young women these days contract HPV, but most don't get cervical cancer because their immune systems are able to clear the virus away. 70% of women clear the infection within 1 year, 90% within 2 years before the virus can cause cancer, unless you're immunocompromised or something. Well, if that's the case, maybe those with particularly strong immune systems will be able to clear the virus even faster. And that's what may be behind this new study that found women eating vegetarian appeared to clear the virus quicker, significantly lower infection rates. HPV, one of many studies showing lower rates of HPV infection among those eating plant-based diets. So, for example, you take a bunch of women with cancer-causing strains of HPV infecting their cervix, and then you test them 3 months, 9 months, all while analyzing their diets. What do you find? You find that higher levels of vegetable consumption may cut the risk of HPV persistence in half, doubling one's likelihood of clearing this cancer-causing infection. And by higher levels, they were just talking literally just 2 or more servings of vegetables a day. That's how powerful are plants. This may help explain these important new findings this year. Vegan women have significantly lower risk of all female cancers combined, including cancer of the cervix. Right? So even though it's a virus that's actually causing the cancer, it doesn't mean that diet still can't play an important role to reduce the risk. In the same way that fermented pickles, kimchi, and sauerkraut prevent the growth of bad bacteria by maintaining an acidic environment, so does the human vagina. The normal pH of one's vagina is that of tomato juice. Once it starts creeping up to that of coffee, though, an overgrowth of bad bacteria can take hold, cause what's called bacterial vaginosis, which affects an astounding 29% of American women, making it the most frequent cause of vaginal complaints. People don't talk about it, but 29%, right? It's commonly diagnosed with, literally, this is what's called the so-called whiff test, where doctors take a whiff, smelling for this kind of characteristic of the vaginal discharge, smelling for this characteristic fishy odor. Why is it so common? Well, it's thought to be the high fat intake, particularly saturated fat. Remember, dairy, cheese, cake, and pork, chicken, dairy, chicken, cake, and pork make raise vaginal pH, which may increase the risk of bacterial vaginosis. So now that we know, what do we got to do about it? Well, we got to tell OBGYNs, we got to tell doctors, tell everyone in the community that optimal nutrition may prevent infection of the genital tract and maintain reproductive health. What might saturated fat be doing to the reproductive health of men? Well, a recent Harvard study found that just a 5% increase in saturated fat among men led to a 38% decrease in sperm counts. But, male fertility is more than just about sperm count, the number of sperm, but actually how well the sperms work. I talk more about that in this video if anyone's particularly interested. But when it comes to male reproductive health, this is what doctors hear about the most. Erectile dysfunction. Erectile dysfunction is present in up to 30 million men in the U.S., approximately 100 million men worldwide. Wait a sec, the U.S. only has about 5% of the world's population, yet up to 30% of the impotence? We're number one! It's not you, it's me. Who cares, though? We got red, white, and blue pills like Viagra, right? Well, the problem is the pills just cover up the symptoms of vascular disease, don't do anything for the underlying pathology, right? Erectile dysfunction, coronary heart disease, it's the same disease, two manifestations of the same disease, right? Which is these clogged, dysfunctional, diseased, crippled arteries. 40% of men over 40 have erectile dysfunction, 40 over 40, placing them at nearly 50 times the risk of a cardiac event like sudden death. You know, it's funny when I give this talk to kind of general audiences, you know, everyone's like nodding their head, but when I give that statistic here, everyone's like, what? 40%? Wow. It tells you something about the audience. 50 times the risk of a cardiac event, which they mean like sudden death. That's what they mean by a cardiac event. Nearly 5,000% increase in risk, causing the latest review to ask, wait a second, is there any risk greater than that? And we used to think of erectile dysfunction in younger men in their 20s, 30s as so-called psychogenic in origin, which means it's all in their head. But now we're realizing that it may more likely be the early stages of vascular disease. A man with erectile dysfunction, even if they have no cardiac symptoms, should be considered a cardiac patient until proven otherwise. The reason even young men should care about their cholesterol levels, that hardening of the arteries can lead to softening of the penis even decades down the road. Your cholesterol level now can predict your sexual functioning later. You say, well, look, I just want to keep eating crap because I can take some pills. Well, all the Viagra in the world may not help your sex life after a stroke. The take-home message is really a simple equation. ED stands for early death. It's survival of the firmest. Don't encourage me. The enzyme that Viagra-like drugs muck with is actually found two places in the body, not only the erectile tissue of the penis, but also the other place it's found is in the retinas of the eyes. That's why the FDA encourages people to stop taking drugs like Viagra. Call your doctor right away if you experience a sudden loss in vision. Of course, you can still find your phone. Which brings us to the next group of primary diagnoses, which is injury and poisoning, which includes actually adverse drug side effects. So not only a leading killer in the United States, but actually a common cause for medical intervention. Next comes skin complaints. Any hope for cellulite? Well, check out the video. Basically, researchers compared a meat-free, egg-free diet, healthy diet, mostly vegetables, grains, legumes, fruits, and nuts, compared to the standard ADA, American Diabetes Association diet. And what happened? Well, the veg group lost more weight, even though they were made to eat the exact same number of calories, same calories, but the veg group lost more weight, lost more waist, became slimmer, lost more cholesterol, more sub-Q fat, more abdominal fat, more belly fat, and this subcutaneous, this under-the-skin fat is what makes up cellulite. And those with sensitive skin might want to give flax seeds a try. Next up is digestive issues, though there is an international prune association keeping us all apprised of prune news around the world. The California Prune Board successfully pressured the FDA to change the name to dried plums, which evidently evokes more of a positive fresh fruit goodness image in hopes of attracting their target audience, women. Of course, it might help if they actually included one or two of them on their board. But the name change was in hopes of de-emphasizing its connections with digestive regularity issues, but why sell yourself short? Randomized clinical trial, prunes versus Metamucil. Nearly 60 million Americans suffer from chronic constipation. Here's the study subjects at baseline. Each one of these dots is a complete complete spontaneous bowel movement. Note how many people had 0 bowel movements per week at baseline, but an average of 1.7 a week, which went up to 3.5 on prunes, at least every other day. It did better than the Metamucil, and so concluded prunes should actually be the first-line therapy for constipation instead of doing drugs. But look, if that's what one plant, adding one plant to your diet can do, what if your entire diet was composed of plants? Off the charts. Off the charts. You know, vegans, it turns out, are just regular people. I also cover other common digestive issues like irritable bowel, chronic indigestion, but what about cancer? 500,000 Americans are diagnosed with cancer every year, equal to 5 jumbo jets crashing every day. The number of Americans who die every year from cancer, more than all Americans who've died in all U.S. wars combined. This happens every year. A tumor cannot grow, though, without a blood supply. Currently, it's believed that a tumor can't get much bigger than the tip of the ball, the tip of a ballpoint pen, unless it gets hooked up to a blood supply, which indicates that which indicates that angiogenesis, angio means vessel, the genesis, the creation of new blood vessels is critical for tumor growth. Each one of us, here's the bad news, each one of us has cancer cells in our body right now. But a tumor can't grow without getting hooked up to a blood supply. So what tumors do is diabolically release these angiogenic factors which cause blood vessels to start sprouting into the tumor. So what does our body do about it? Well, the most important one of these angiogenic factors is what's called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. We can block VEGF, though, with veggies. No, seriously, most of them are phytonutrients that we know and love. In tea and spices and fruit and berries and broccoli and beans can block the cancer stimulation of new blood vessels. Given the power of plants, one might speculate that the foundation of an anti-angiogenic approach to cancer would be a healthy vegan diet. How else can we starve cancer? 40 years ago, a landmark paper was published showing that most human cancers have what's called absolute methionine dependency, meaning normal cells thrive without the amino acid methionine, but cancer cells need it or they die. What do tumors do with methionine? Well, tumors use methionine to generate these gaseous sulfur-containing compounds that specially trained diagnostic dogs can actually pick up. There are mole-sniffing dogs that can pick out skin cancer. There are breath-sniffing dogs that can pick out people with lung cancer. Pee-sniffing dogs that can diagnose bladder cancer. And yes, you guessed it, fart-sniffing dogs for colorectal cancer. Serious. Doctors can now bring their lab to the lab. Whole new meaning to the term PET scan. So, of course, chemo companies are fighting to be the first to come out with some kind of methionine-depleting drug. But since methionine is mainly sourced from food, right, better strategy would be to lower methionine levels in the body by lowering methionine intake. eliminating high methionine foods from our diet for both cancer growth control as well as lifespan extension. So I don't have time to get into here, but I have a video about it, of course. So where is methionine found? Particularly chicken and fish. Fish is actually the worst. And then dairy, red meat, and eggs have less. But if you really want to stick with low methionine foods, you got to stick with plants. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, grains, and beans. In other words, in humans, methionine restriction may be achieved using a predominantly vegan diet, making methionine restriction really feasible as a life extension strategy. This is actually beyond just the reduction in cancer rates. So, does this actually play out? Do people who eat beans actually live longer? The paleo people, like beans are going to kill you, right? Well, there's paleo, but then there's science here. Let me share a little science with you. Turns out that legumes, beans, split peas, chickpeas, and lentils actually may be the single most important predictor of survival in populations around the world. You want to know how long a population lives on average? You see how many legumes they eat. Whereas, if you're feeling suicidal, a bean-free diet may actually increase the risk of death. It is now 8 years since the famous Ornish study was published, suggesting that 12 months on a strictly plant-based diet could reverse the progression of prostate cancer. Wait a second. How are they able to get a group of older men to go vegan for a year? Well, they home-delivered pre-cooked meals, left them at their door, figuring, men are so lazy, they'll just gonna eat whatever's put in front of them. And it worked. All right, but what about out in the real world where we can't get most men with cancer to even eat 5 measly servings of fruits and veggies a day? Well, researchers settled on just trying to change their A to V ratio, right? The ratio of animal to vegetable proteins, and indeed we're successful in cutting this ratio in half from about 2 to 1 animal to plant to like 1 to 1, kind of half vegan, kind of part-time vegan. All right. How'd they do? Well, a part-time plant-based diet appeared to slow down cancer progression. Right? But what Ornish got was an apparent reversal in cancer growth, right? The cancer biomarker PSA didn't just go up slower, it went down, suggesting a shrinkage in tumor volume, right? So the ideal animal to plant ratio may be closer to 0. If there's just no way Grandpa's going vegan, though, and we only have half measures, what might be the worst A and the best V? Well, eggs and poultry may be the worst, respectively doubling and potentially quadrupling the risk of cancer progression, defined as like spread to the bone or death. Harvard researchers found twice the risk eating less than a single egg a day or eating less than a single serving of chicken and turkey may quadruple the risk of cancer progression. And if you could only add one thing to your diet, if you could just pick one, it would be cruciferous vegetables. Less than a single serving a day of broccoli or cauliflower, kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts may cut the risk of cancer progression more than half. One simple dietary intervention. A similar result was found in breast cancer survivors. Less than a single serving a day may cut the risk of cancer recurrence, the cancer coming back, in half. Right? This Women's Healthy Eating and Living study was undertaken thousands of breast cancer survivors. They wanted to know if a plant-based diet could influence breast cancer recurrence and survival. All right, well, what did they find? Imagine you've been diagnosed with breast cancer. In fact, estrogen receptor negative breast cancer, which normally has twice the mortality unless you eat 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day and exercise, walk like 2 miles, about a half an hour a day, 6 days a week. So this so-called high vegetable, fruit, and physical activity group, really, that should be in quotes. I mean, you could do 5 servings of fruits and vegetables in one meal, right? One salad, right? And you can certainly walk more than 2 miles a day. But imagine for a second you've been diagnosed. Imagine sitting in that chair in the doctor's office as the doctor comes into the room and breaks the news. Imagine how you'd feel. But there's this experimental new treatment that can cut your risk of dying in the next few years down from like 16% down to just 4%. To quadruple their survival, many women would remortgage their home to fly to some quack clinic in Mexico, lose all their hair to chemo, but most apparently couldn't stand the thought of eating broccoli or cutting down on meat. Maybe we should start cooking for the women too. The only reason Ornish and colleagues were able to get away with treating cancer with just a vegan diet, no chemo, radiation, surgery, is because in the early stages of prostate cancer, it grows so slow that you can put men in kind of a holding pattern, because what you would do, the next step is what's called a radical prostatectomy, which can lead to impotence and incontinence. It's just a horrible surgery. So we know it's going to happen. We just delay it as long as possible. So if you're just kind of in a watch and wait stage, hey, might as well give diet a try. Are there other cancers we can test out plants on? Well, esophageal cancer is not the cancer to get. Most die within months of diagnosis. You didn't even know you had it, and the doctor tells you have 6 months to live, or even less, a few months to live. But the development of esophageal is a multi-stage process. You start out with a normal esophagus, which is the tube that goes from your mouth to your stomach. Starts out normal, but then precancerous changes start to take place. Then localized cancer starts to grow. Then it starts to spread, and you die. But because of this well-defined, stepwise progression of the cancer, researchers jumped on it as a way to test berries, the healthiest fruits, to see if they could reverse this process. A randomized, phase 2, clinical trial of powdered strawberries. 6 months eating the equivalent of a pound of fresh strawberries a day, and the progression of disease was reversed in 80% of the patients. At the beginning of the study, none had a normal esophagus. By the end of the study, most lesions either regressed from moderate to mild or disappeared completely, from moderate to mild, or from mild to just plain gone. By the end of the study, half of those on the high strawberry treatment diet walked away disease-free, a 52.7% cure rate. So obviously, you saw this on the front page of the New York Times, or on the Examiner, obviously. A drop in tumor markers before and after, all because of just strawberries, right? Cellular proliferation before and after so-called strawberry treatments. Same story with black raspberries and oral cancer. Most patients' lesions improved, including complete clinical regression, meaning kind of now you see it, now you don't. Disease-free, walked away. They actually showed a turning back on of tumor suppressor genes. So the berries were working at a genetic level to actually change gene expression. No matter what genes we were given to us, right? We can alter our genetic heritage, alter the risk. So again, even though, something like oral cancer probably caused by smoking, right? So even though this diet can still affect the progression, right? But this kind of treasure remains buried, pun intended, because nobody profits. Nobody, that is, except the hundreds of thousands of people a year stricken with this horrible cancer. And finally, to close us out, infections. After the common cold, the most common infection is of the urinary tract. We've known for decades that it's bacteria creeping up from the rectum that causes bladder infections, but only recently did we figure out the original source of these UTI-causing bacteria, where they were coming from, and now we know it is chicken. We now have DNA fingerprinting proof of a direct link between farm animals' meat and bladder infections, solid evidence that human bladder infections may be a zoonosis, meaning animal to human disease. The best way to prevent bladder infections, the best way to prevent any infection, not get infected in the first place. You say, wait a second, can't you just use a meat thermometer, cook the meat through? No, because of cross-contamination. We've known for decades, you give someone a chicken to prepare and cook in their own kitchen, and as they normally would, and a multitude of antibiotic-resistant bacteria jump from the chicken into the gut of the volunteer even before eating it. This jump happens after the bird was handled, but before it was eaten. So not only does it not matter how well you cook the thing, you could burn it to a crisp, right? It doesn't even matter if you eat any. It's just handling it in the kitchen. All right? And then, within days, the drug-resistant chicken bacteria had multiplied to the point of becoming a major part of the gut flora of these volunteers. The chicken bacteria was like taking over. What if you're really careful in the kitchen, though? The effectiveness of hygiene procedures for prevention of cross-contamination from chicken carcasses in the domestic kitchen. What they did, they went to a dozen homes, gave everyone a chicken, and asked them to cook it. After they were done cooking, there was bacteria from chicken feces, and not just any fecal bacteria, Salmonella specifically, and Campylobacter, two serious human pathogens everywhere. On the cutting board, utensils, on their hands, on the fridge handle, the cupboard, the oven handle doorknob, right? But this was before they cleaned up. After cleaning, still pathogenic fecal bacteria everywhere. And this was just, regular retail chicken bought at the store. They didn't inoculate the chicken with bacteria for the study because they knew it just come from the store prepackaged with pathogens. Okay. Obviously, people don't know what they're doing in the kitchen, all right. So they took another group of people, gave them specific instructions, right? After you cook the chicken, you got to wash everything with hot water, detergent. They told specifically, look, you got to wash the cutting board, right? Knobs on the sink, the faucet, the fridge doorknobs, everything. Okay, and the researchers still found these fecal matter chicken bugs everywhere. Fine, last group. You can tell they're getting a little frustrated. This time, they're going to insist that people bleach everything, right? The dishcloth, immersed in bleach disinfectant. And then they actually sprayed the bleach disinfectant on all those surfaces, waited a couple minutes, let the bleach do its work. All right. And they still found Campylobacter and Salmonella on some utensils, the dishcloth, the counter around the sink and the cupboard. All right, definitely better. But still, unless your kitchen is like some biohazard lab, right? If the only way to guarantee you're not going to leave infection around your kitchen is to not bring it into your home in the first place. The good news is it's not like you eat chicken once and you're colonized for life. In this study, The chicken bacteria only seem to last about 10 days before our good bacteria were able to kind of muscle it out of the way. The problem is, many families eat chicken more than once every 10 days and thereby kind of constantly reintroducing these chicken bugs into their systems. Anyways, there we have it. The top dozen reasons people seek medical care, mostly for diseases that could have been prevented. And then rather than treating the underlying causes of the disease, typically doctors treat risk factors, right, for disease, like giving a lifetime's worth of medications just to lower blood sugar, blood pressure, cholesterol, right? But think about it. High blood pressure, that's just a symptom of the underlying disease, which is these disease dysfunctional stiffened arteries, right? So sure, you can take a pill that artificially lowers your blood pressure. You're not doing anything for the root cause. Disregarding the underlying causes and treating only risk factors is somewhat like mopping up the floor around an overflowing sink instead of just turning off the faucet. Right? But drug companies are more than happy to sell us new rolls of paper towel every day for the rest of our lives. But when the underlying lifestyle causes are addressed, people are able to stop taking medications or avoid surgery. We spend billions cracking people's chests open, but only rarely does it actually prolong anyone's life, right? In contrast, how about wiping out at least 90% of heart disease? And think about it. Heart disease accounts for more premature deaths than any other illness, almost completely preventable, thanks to changes in diet and lifestyle. And those same changes can prevent or treat other diseases, the same thing, right? Why? So why don't doctors do it? Well, one reason, doctors don't get paid to do it. Right? No one profits from lifestyle medicine, so it's not part of medical education or practice. Right? Presently, physicians lack training, financial incentives, so they continue to do what they know how to do, prescribe medication, perform surgery. After Dr. Dean Ornish proved you could reverse our number one killer, heart disease, open up arteries without drugs, without surgery, just plant-based diet and other healthy changes, he thought that his studies would have a meaningful effect on the practice of mainstream cardiology. After all, a cure for our number one killer? But he admits he was mistaken. He realized that reimbursement is a more powerful determinant of medical practice than research. Reimbursement over research. Not a very flattering portrayal of the healing profession, but look, if docs aren't going to do it without getting paid, let's get them paid. All right, so Dr. Ornish went to Washington arguing that, look, if we pay for doctors to learn, practice lifestyle medicine, we could save trillions, and that's just heart disease, diabetes, breast cancer, prostate cancer, right? So the Take Back Your Health Act was introduced into the U.S. Senate to induce doctors to learn and practice lifestyle medicine, not only because it works better, but they actually get paid to do it. And the bill died, just like millions of Americans will continue to do with reversible chronic diseases. We have known for at least a decade that the leading causes of death and persistent misery are chronic diseases, which are in turn attributable to the use of our feet, exercise, forks, diet, and fingers, smoking, right? Feet, forks, and fingers. That's it, right? Master levels of medical destiny for millions upon millions every year. We as doctors, as a medical profession, we've known. Ornish published in the most prestigious medical journal in the world 23 years ago. We've known, but we have not managed to care, writes the director of Yale University's Prevention Research Center, at least not care deeply enough to turn what we know into what we routinely do. Were we to do so, we might be able to eliminate most heart disease, strokes, diabetes, and cancer, but look, saving millions is just a number. Right? He asked doctors, look, forget the bland statistics of public health and ask yourself if you love someone, who has suffered a heart attack, stroke, cancer, diabetes. Right? Now imagine their faces. Whisper their names. Recall what it felt like to get the news. Right? And think about everybody else, recalling the faces of beloved loved ones. Right? But now imagine 8 out of 10 of us wistfully reflecting on intimate love and loss, personal anguish, never got that dreadful news because it never happened. Mom did not get cancer. Dad did not have a heart attack. Right? Grandpa didn't have a stroke. Sister, uncle, aunt did not lose a limb or kidneys or eyes to diabetes. We are all intimately linked in this network of personal tragedy that need never have occurred, which leads him to what he's asking doctors to do about it, right? Put a face on public health every chance you get, right? When talking about heart disease and its prevention or cancer, diabetes, ask your audience to kind of see in their mind's eye the face of a loved one affected by that condition. Then imagine that loved one among the 80% who need never have succumbed if what we knew as doctors were what we do. Thank you.
Just for a minute. I love you.
I'd really like to thank Dr. Greger for coming and all of our other presenters. And I would like to remind many of you here that it's the San Francisco Vegetarian Society that makes this happen. And I would like to have more support, both as membership or donations, to help us so that we can continue. This is our 14th year that we've done this, and none of us make any money from it. But we want to get the message out, and Dr. Greger and many of our presenters have helped us do that. We do have vendors down in the courtyard after this talk for about 15 minutes, and you can circulate. But before you go, I would like to just say, Dr. Greger, I will be 80 December 2nd. But that's no big deal. The big deal is that I don't have any diseases. And not only that, but both of my younger sisters who did not get influenced by me are dead. They died in their mid-60s.
Sorry.
So there is a testimony to exactly what you said. I'm standing here.
Yay!
So if any of you still have some dinner reservations left, you can get them in the courtyard. And we also have some more entertainment and some other speakers. And are you going to go in the courtyard?
I'll be right here. If anyone would like to share the talk that you just heard, I have it on DVD. For $10, if you missed last year's talk here at the Veg Fest, I have that one as well. And my latest in nutrition, the volume 15 just came out last week. I have them all actually right here at a table over there. Wave your hand, somebody who's over by the table. All the proceeds from all the sales of all my books and DVDs all goes to DVD, all goes to charity. And if you have any other questions and you're a member of the San Francisco Vegetarian Society, come over there and I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Let me just move over there. Thank you.
Thank you for what